podcast, what do you need to do?
You've got to subscribe
Yeah.
and like and comment.
Yes, we love hearing comments.
Lots of comments. We love them.
Love it, because then we get to comment back rather than just talking to ourselves in the comments.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit just Richard commenting, me commenting.
Welcome to our wonderful listeners, wherever you are in the world. We know we've got listeners in Greece,
yeah.
India,
The US,
Israel,
Australia.
Yeah, all over the place. So it's growing, Voices to Dream.
Mm-hmm, yeah, definitely.
More and more popular by the day.
Yeah. And it's going to be even more popular once everyone hears about this next guest.
Yes.
We've
got a lovely guest with us tonight, I do believe.
Yeah.
And you know a lot more about this lovely guest than I do.
I do. I loved her book. Yeah. And you forgot to say who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Richard Harris, Dr. Richard Anthony Harris. Mm-hmm. And you are?
I'm Suzanne Mann.
Fantastic.
And we're Voices to Dream, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've got the lovely Gina Wilkinson with us tonight. Tell us a bit more about Gina Wilkinson.
Well, I sort of have stalked Gina on Instagram because my mum and I, we do book reviews.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, Mariah and me book reviewers on Instagram.
I've heard of you.
Yeah,
Mariah
have you?
And,
yes. And we read and reviewed one of Gina's. Well, it's your first first novel, isn't it? In the Apricots Bloom.
It's my first novel, but not my first book.
No, because you've
non-fiction book.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking, and so we might hear a bit more about that as well. So I wanted to quickly welcome Gina Wilkinson, the amazing, who author, journalist, mother, juggler of everything.
lover of hairless cats.
Yes.
If you follow me on Instagram, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
A real hairless cat. Yeah.
I just know them.
I have a husband with cat allergies, so this was the only cat that was possible, and he's turned out to be fantastic. Actually, feels beautiful and has a lot of charisma.
Wonderful.
Oh, very good. Well, I just know them as the Austin Powers cats. So.
Oh yeah, no, my cat is much more attractive than that. He is a cat of color. He is a gray cat. Which, the Austin Powers cat looks a little bit like a boiled cat, but my cat doesn't look like that. Much more handsome. Much more handsome. Anyway,
oh, very good.
If you stalk me on Instagram, you'll see him. He's lovely.
Yeah, we'll be talking about all of the ways to catch up with Gina at the end of the show. But so we're going to be talking to Gina about lots of things. Gina has had an amazing life, which I'm going to get Gina to just
but I'm going to check in first.
Yeah, I'm going to get her to fill us in on that. But I was about to say we're going to check in first.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Would you like to?
No, me.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I was going to get you to check in.
I will check in first. We usually check in first, Gina, just so that you get a hang of what checking in is. I'm a bit of an emotional mess today, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm going to be completely truthful.
Okay.
I've been a bit of an emotional mess today. Lots of things going on in my life, and sometimes all of that pressure, sort of like you feel like you're a volcano that's about to explode. So,
but you've pulled yourself together.
I've pulled myself together for the podcast, but I do think that I had a good cry today, and I feel like sometimes you just need a good cry as that little pressure release valve. So that's me checking in. How are you going, Richard?
Oh, I'm just wonderful. Life is just nuts and chaos and chaotic, and it's good to be sitting down talking to a sane person over here in Gina. Oh, no, I mean you.
Oh, me. Sorry, I thought there was a fourth person.
I knew he wasn't talking about me.
So, yeah, look, I'm heading to Blissland in 4 days to go and write my second novel in Portugal. So I'm kind of thinking if I can get through this madness and fixing aneurysms and all this crazy surgery stuff, I will be able to write about 11th century maidens and knights and things. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But that's how I'm checking in. A little bit crazy too.
Well, Gina, are you bringing any sanity to us here today? How are you checking?
I can't Yeah, I can't guarantee anything on that that front. Sorry, wrong person. But I'm actually feeling pretty good because my husband and I have been renovating a house. And also, we were living overseas for 20 years, and we moved back just before the start of the COVID pandemic. We've been in lots of, Airbnbs and rentals, and we renovated a old house that we bought. And I have been without a garden now for over 2 years, and today just finished transforming our backyard, which was 100% concrete, into something that I can plant plants in. So this weekend is going to be planting, because even though I only had a concrete backyard and I ran out of money because I was renovating a house, I've grown some amazing plants from seed, from
Beautiful.
cuttings. I just thought, I've got no budget, so I'm just going to do seeds and cuttings. And wow, did that work out well. So I actually am feeling great. I've got some green lawn, which I did not grow from seed, just rolled it out. And wow, what a transformation. So for me, having a garden, and I think many people probably experienced this during the pandemic, such a stress relief. It's I'm one of those people that often worries about things, and very organized, or tries to be very organized. And when I'm in my garden, I can just be in the moment, and there's not too many moments where I'm just in the moment. So today is a very good day, seeing the concrete go and grass roll out, and garden beds freshly, full of compost, mulched, ready to go.
Love it.
So awesome day for me.
Oh, I love it.
Well done.
Yeah.
Very positive.
Yeah, there's nothing better. I must admit, I must agree. I love, I don't do it that much because, at the moment my garden's just full of weeds. but when it's fresh and you can put new things in and put some fresh flowers in, it's just beautiful. I can totally understand that feeling. Beautiful. I'm so glad you're going to have that for the weekend.
Congratulations.
Very exciting. Yeah.
Well, would you like to start by telling us a bit about yourself, Gina? Tell us why have we got you here today? Are you just a random person I've seen on the street?
No, well, gosh, when I saw the questions we were going to be asking, I was like, oh, why did they ask me to this? Have they got the right person? No, okay. So I'm originally from Western Australia. I grew up in a variety of very small towns in WA. My family moved around a lot, and that sort of continued into my adult life. I have moved around a lot. I mentioned that I just spent the last 20 years or so overseas. That started when I was 17. I left my town of 1,500 people, 2 pubs and no traffic lights, and I went to Brazil for a year. I came back to Australia and I studied journalism. I worked in independent radio, and then I worked for SBS. And then I went off overseas again, met my husband in Canada, and we moved around a bit more to Thailand and other places, including Iraq, where I worked as firstly for the United Nations under Sadam Hussein, and then when the Iraq War started, I returned to being a journalist, and I was the ABC's correspondent in Baghdad. And the reason we connected, Suzanne, is because I wrote a book called When the Apricots Bloom. That is fiction, but it was inspired by a real life and very complicated relationship that I had with an Iraqi woman who turned out to be an informant for Saddam Hussein's secret police. And she was secretly, spying on what I did and reporting back. And I got to say, I definitely do not blame her at all for that. If Saddam Hussein's and the secret police say they want something, very few people were in a position to say no. But when I started writing this book, it was many years later, and I was still thinking to myself, were we actually friends? Was it just an unpleasant duty? Is that why she spent time with me? Or was there something underneath that? And so I started writing a book that begins with the moment the secret police arrive at the home of an Iraqi secretary working in the Australian embassy and tell her that she has to befriend her boss's wife in order to gain access to information. And it's told from the perspective of the Iraqi woman who's doing the spying, and from the perspective of the foreign wife that she is informing on, and then also from the perspective of a third woman, an Iraqi artist. And I did that because I wanted to show some of the less, oppressive sides of life in Iraq, some of the more wonderful aspects of Iraq, and the art scene there was just amazing. And I am extremely grateful for that. I met a lot of artists. I made a lot of friends in the artistic community. So I wanted to show a bit more of a rounded perspective, and I guess that is how I got invited along here tonight.
Was it that always in you to want to write a novel, and this subject matter came along, or where did that form? How did you formulate that?
Yeah, actually, no, people, they used to say to me, oh, you should write a book. This is especially when I was in Iraq. I used to do something, send out a little email letter called, I think it was the Baghdad Bulletin, and people would write back to me and say, you should write a book. And I think, gosh, no, that's 300 pages. You've got to have a plot. I'm a journalist. I'm used to reporting on what's happening on this day, or, maybe a half-hour documentary, but definitely not a 300-page book that's going to take years in the making. But then actually after Iraq, it turned out I wrote my first book. It was narrative nonfiction. So it was true, but told like a story. And it's the story of what happened to me and my closest women friends during that period from when I arrived in Iraq till when I left. So starting about a year before the war and ending about a year later. And, that was just sort of an accident. I never thought that I would have enough information to fill up a book, or the desire to fill up a book. But I found after that event that I did have something to write about, and that I enjoyed it. And I guess several years later, I was still thinking about that relationship and that complicated friendship. And I thought, I'm going to try and, I guess, work it out on paper, imagine what the answers could be and how someone could be in such a situation.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Did you ever contact her again, or do you know what happened?
I have seen her since. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
How did she turn out?
Oh, you have to read the book.
Okay.
You have to read the book to know, to have an insight into maybe what's happening there. But I wanted to ask as well. Now, you, in the other 20 years, you've done a lot of traveling to other places as well. Now, what's and worked for, as I understand, BBC, ABC, NPR.
Yeah, a lot of public broadcasters. I'm definitely a public broadcaster person, mostly in radio. So yeah, all my employers were in public broadcasting.
Yeah.
Because I do think of journalism as a public service, and that's you've got different agendas in the commercial media. Not saying that it doesn't deserve a place on the radio dial or on your TV or in your reading, but you've got a different agenda and or news, different priorities in the news that you select. And I've always been a public broadcaster. And when I actually moved to Iraq, my husband had been following me around the world, following my career, and he was actually offered a job working for UNICEF in Baghdad.
Right.
And at that time, we were told that it would be a very uneventful posting. This country was, I know, hard to believe now, right? But we were told, the country's under sanctions. Nothing happens without Saddam Hussein's say-so. There are only a handful of foreigners there. No one's allowed in and out. It's very, very quiet. And because he'd been sort of following me around, we sort of thought, well, this is a good opportunity for him, even though it meant that I could not work as a journalist because Saddam Hussein didn't allow foreign journalists into the country, except for some, very tightly controlled little press tours where you're in and out in a week. But I, being a journalist, I was still sort of intrigued about the idea of going to Iraq, I guess partly because it was sealed off from the outside world, and also because it has played such a pivotal part in history both modern history and ancient history. And the idea of being allowed in, to experience that was intriguing. And so I agreed to go, and pretty much as we crossed the border, President George Bush Sr. Gave the infamous axis of evil speech, and all of a sudden it became clear that it wasn't going to be an uneventful posting, far from it. So I went from being like a career woman to suddenly being I had a terrible visa category. It was dependent spouse. It was the only Western dependent spouse in all of Iraq, and so it was quite a transformation. And actually, the Western woman in my book, she experiences the same thing. She's a journalist. She gives up her job, and she's suddenly a dependent spouse. But unlike her, I actually went out and found myself a part-time job working for the UN Oil for Food program. And unlike her, I also was very careful not to go around poking my nose into other people's business or going places where I shouldn't have been, because, we were given a briefing before we went into Iraq by the UN security services saying, the office is bugged. Your home will probably be bugged. If you want to have a private conversation, go for a walk outside, because just avoid any power source for a microphone, and so just assume anything you say indoors will be heard. So it was,
live like that.
It is amazing what you can get used to. And also, we didn't have any secrets. We were under a lot of surveillance, but we didn't have any secrets. We did have a couple incidents where we had, I did get my steps in. I went for a lot of walks, but it was just to get out of the house. But we had a couple incidents where we had things we didn't want the regime to know about. And in that case, we'd usually go in the bathroom, we'd turn on the tap at the basin, we'd turn on the exhaust fan, we'd turn on the shower, we'd flush the loo, and then we'd whisper in each other's ears. Or if I did something and I was worried that they might have a camera, I would often go into the pantry. And I had to take some money out of the country once, and I was only allowed to take out a very, very small amount of money. I took a calzone, the Iraqi version of a calzone, into the pantry and unstuffed it, wrapped my money up in Glad wrap, stuffed the money into the calzone, and then stuffed the food back in, and took the calzone with me as my lunch. And
my goodness.
So I did do some, I never thought I'd be stuffing money in a calzone in a pantry, but
Never done that?
No.
Life takes unusual turns.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's it, because I'd be concerned that, are they just listening, or are they watching as well? Are they recording? I mean, are they in your bedroom?
We did think about that. We kept the lights off, but it is amazing what you can get used to. I guess the biggest thing that was hard to get used to was having to censor yourself, and knowing that everyone around you was also censoring yourself because themselves, because Saddam Hussein was everywhere. Everywhere you looked, he was on a billboard, he was on a statue, he was painted on the wall, and yet it was completely taboo to say his name out loud, because my Iraqi friends, if I said his name out loud, they'd get nervous that whoever is listening in would suddenly be paying attention. Right. So no one said his name out loud, and it was such a weird contrast between seeing his name everywhere and yet his name never passed, seeing his face everywhere, but his name never passed anybody's lips. So it was a strange experience, but also I think being under that sort of pressure, the pressure of war approaching, the pressure of being under in situations of conflict and dealing with the losses that we experienced, I feel like I really did make my closest, some of my closest, most lasting friends there. And there's that sort of cliche that old soldiers say, "Oh, I never made such good mates as I made in the trenches." Well, I understand that now, because I think many people experience, not just in war zones, but if you have some sort of tragedy and someone else goes through it with you, you do have a connection that can be, very strong. and endure for a long time. I'm still in touch with many of my Iraqi friends, and it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And when I left, there was no working phone, there was no working internet, and yet somehow we still managed to stay connected.
Wow.
How terrifying was it as the war sort of started? And I mean, it must have been very frightening, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I was young then. I was 32, and I think I still had, even though I had been a journalist for a long time and I knew that terrible things happen to good people, I think I still had this belief that if you are a good person, if you try as hard as you can, you'll be okay. And, that's not always the case, unfortunately. And so I guess I sort of lost my naivety there. And I think also I had confidence, that I would be protected by as being a UN, associated with the UN, being an aid worker or being a journalist. Up until that time, it had been fairly rare for journalists or aid workers to be actively targeted in a war zone. We did, to a large extent, we were protected or we weren't targeted. And, during the Iraq war, that definitely changed. And you did become an actual target, as opposed to just, being caught a collateral. You were actually a target. So, it was. But I think it's when you're doing a job, you just get in there and do it. You don't think about it too much, or I guess you wouldn't do it. You just think of it as your job, and that's what you have to do, and go out and do it.
Gosh.
So I guess
Amazing.
suspend your disbelief, I guess, in a way. Like
Gosh.
being in a novel, reading
Yeah.
a novel, you got to suspend your disbelief, and you just got to keep going.
One of the areas that I found, one of the things from the book that I found really interesting that I had not realized was actually in regards to Saddam's sons and how they were treating people, and in particular women. And in the book there's the daughter who's afraid of being taken by one of his sons. And I think there's the story of someone who actually on their wedding day, I mean, was that made up? Someone who on their wedding
that
day
was true, actually.
gets
Yeah,
taken.
there are a little. Yeah, I did include quite a few real life things that happened in Iraq. Some of them I had to take out actually when it was during the editing process because they were just too confronting,
Right.
or I guess they took the. I remember there was one thing I wanted to include about a woman who was a doctor, and she was executed by the regime, and I tried to write that into the book, but I think I got off track in trying to sort of pay homage to her.
Yeah.
But there's sure plenty in there to. There's definitely enough to show you what was going on. But yeah, definitely it was not safe to be a woman. That definitely, you weren't protected in any way, and you were. From Uday Hussein in particular, Saddam's son. I think he was the one that people feared more than Saddam. Saddam seemed to operate reasonably logically, whereas Uday was, murderous psycho. So, he was definitely, I think, probably the most feared, person in Iraq at that time.
And just to, I mean, I guess as a mother as well, to have that whole sense of, that your daughter's not actually necessarily safe. And even in saying that, neither were your sons either, because then, to live in a situation where your child at any time can be taken to join the army or be taken as like a sex slave or just killed for no real reason. It's virtually incomprehensible. I mean, living in Australia, it's hard to imagine such a thing.
Yeah, it was, terrible under Saddam Hussein. But I think a lot of people around the world are living with that daily fear of not knowing if your child is going to come home. If we look at the situation in Ukraine, for example, there is a lot of conflict around the world where parents, unfortunately, aren't able to have confidence that their kids can go out and come home safely. Yeah, it's very true.
Gina, I'd imagine there's very few Western people that got that perspective. Has anyone else written about those times from, because it's such a unique...
One of the reasons that I wanted to do this book was because there was some, literature coming out of Iraq, tended to be, whether it was written by Iraqis or Westerners, from a very male perspective. And one of the things I wanted to do was write from a female perspective. And even though, there were very high stakes events taking place, very unusual events, I tried always to put them in a setting that women all around the world could relate to. One of the scenes that I found the most nerve-wracking actually takes place in a kitchen while one of the protagonists is trying to cook roasted chicken for her son. And, so it happens against this backdrop of everyday life. And I wanted to try and show that female perspective of how women dealt with violence and the challenges that they faced, and put it in a way that anyone can appreciate, especially women. The women in my books, they have a lot of experiences that any woman around the world would experience. They are trying to juggle work and home. They have to deal with rebellious teenagers. One of them is always starting diets and then falling off the bandwagon in a spectacular crash of candy. So I tried to include the things that we share in common. Because there are so many things, that we share in common, and we might bake our bread differently, or we might pray differently, but there also are a lot of similarities. And I really wanted to focus on that because at the moment it feels like we're so divided, and we're really retreating into our tribes and, finding so many differences. Whereas I think, I've lived around the world in a lot of places, and we do, there are many things that we share in common. Of course, every place is unique, but I think the most important things we do share in common, and that is, love of family and friends, the desire to be able to reach your full potential, the desire for safety, shelter, security. These are basic things that we all share. And so I wanted to show that in this book.
It was one of my favorite things, actually, even in your author note at the very end of the book, how you actually say, we share far more in common than that which divides us. I hope this book shows that. And I facilitate a compassion course, and we talk about common humanity and just like me. And it truly is. I think that, and I think you're pointing out as well that we might be talking about you in Iraq, in Saddam Hussein's regime, but as you say, this is still happening all around the world. There are people faced with this every day in different countries. And I think that, I know personally, I can get caught up in my life here in Sydney, and you sort of tend to forget that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up as well. So and I guess that's what we sort of, what we want to do with this podcast is remind people about some of the different things that are going on in the world, and get people thinking about those things, even if it's not, what's on the news today, what else can be happening.
Sure.
And I feel like it's a bit of a good segue into the next part, so this is where we actually, as much as there can be sort of negative stuff going on in the world, where I guess the whole thing of Voices to Dream is that we are dreaming and imagining better and hope, and not giving up that hope in the world. So what we've actually done is we pull out a little part from Richard's book, Imagine, because it really does cover all of the so many different things that you could imagine happening in the world. And then we just want to have a bit of a discussion with you about what you think. And I guess what it is, it's a bit of a brainstorm as to how can we do better? If we ruled the world, what would we do right now to make a change? Okay, so see what you think about this part. This was actually based in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So it's not Iraq. You didn't have a chapter on Iraq. You missed that one.
No, I missed Iraq.
This one's based in
the Middle East, though.
In Afghanistan, and it's after everyone in the world actually becomes compassionate, cooperative. You know, the people that, in my mind, I would love all of us to be all the time. Okay, so let's see what comes up here. It was hard to conceive that half of the people they were now sitting down with had either been Taliban or had been on both sides of the conflict as it had progressed and changed over many years. Here they were breaking bread and conversing with tolerance, friendliness, and real interest with people who had been the very opposite of those ideals in the past. These were people with expertise in manufacturing improvised explosive devices. Some were crack snipers. Some were tunnelers who had burrowed under the local opposition commander's home to plant a bomb, to unseat another oppressor while killing his entire family while doing it. While they did talk about how much everything had changed, especially their perspectives on cultural differences, their position in the world, their history, they were more focused on how lovely the day was, how fresh the fruit was, and what their hopes for the future were. The focus now was on the present and the immediate future, their dreams for their country, their hopes for traveling and seeing the world. What do you think? Is it possible?
Okay. It's interesting that Richard is, that chapter is about Afghanistan. A country that has had so much conflict. And today I saw some very sad news that the Taliban have decided to ban girls in grades 6 and above from attending school. And, that's got terrible repercussions for girls and women themselves, but also for broader, the broader Afghani society. And that's because, if you look at strategies for peace, and for bringing lasting peace, the participation of women is absolutely key. I saw some amazing research that showed that when women are direct participants in peace agreements, the likelihood of a peace agreement lasting more than 2 years increases by 20%. And the probability of it lasting over 15 years increases by 35%. So when we're looking at, ways to bring about peace, I think, women need to play a much larger role and can play a much larger role in peace building if they are given the opportunity, the space and the opportunity to reach their full potential as peace builders. There's actually when you look at the most stable and the most peaceful countries in the world, they generally have much higher levels of gender equality, and the reverse is true as well. Women have different networks than men, and often they are the first to pick up tensions that can then escalate into conflict. And certainly I saw that myself in Iraq, that women were much more, I guess, intuitive about what was likely to happen after the fall of Sadam Hussein in terms of the instability that followed. And, women are also very immersed into their communities. They have insights into the different needs of different parts of the communities. And when they are directly involved in negotiating agreements about peace, you know, they look at broader issues of just say, you know, not just firing bullets at each other. They look at the broader needs of their communities. And that is something I think that is essential. If you want peace to last, you need to do more than just stop the bullets flying. That can be just a band-aid fix. And I think, you know, involving women in crafting peace is, you know, one of the strategies that we should be pursuing in terms of making peace lasting, of generating reconciliation. Women, you know, they're already educating children, they're already counseling family members not to engage in violence. So they are already out there building trust, building dialogue. And so for me, I think, you know, if we look at a future, a peaceful future, I see the role of women as central to that.
Mm.
And how it's so hard to envisage when they're making these crazy decisions to ban women from even learning, you know, secondary education. It's, I mean, I am understanding of reality and but still a great dreamer. But yeah, we also kind of have to look for practical ways forward. And yeah,
Do you think it comes down to a fear? Like, I mean, I know this is quite a basic thing, but is there a fear in some of these? Well, not even in specific cultures, but I'd say all around the world. Is there a fear from men about women
I don't know.
becoming
I mean,
involved?
you've lived in that society where there is this gross paternalism. There's still lots in Australia as well. But I mean, what was the key? Why were they so suppressing of women, do you think? Why do you think those societies do that?
Well, actually, you know, I haven't been to Afghanistan, but in Iraq, a lot of people are surprised to find out that under Saddam Hussein, you know, he was a terrible human rights oppressor, but he also was a reasonably intelligent man, and he recognized the value that women could contribute to the economy, to society. And under Saddam Hussein, women in Iraq actually had greater legal rights than any other women in the Middle East. They had very important positions in government. My friends were doctors, engineers, professors. They drove themselves around. They seemed to have a significant amount of power in their personal relationships at home. So in comparison to some other countries, under Saddam Hussein, you know, it was still, I'm not saying that he was a model to follow at all, but he did recognize the value of women. And after the war, unfortunately, the more fundamentalist, misogynist aspects of society, the groups in society did try and take control. And nowadays, for example, you'll see many, many women wearing the headscarf in Iraq, whereas when I was there, I only had one friend that chose to wear the headscarf. And in fact, I remember one of my friends, she's an artist, really inspiring woman. I think the final straw for her, she had, you know, she probably could have left Iraq, but she was one of the people under Saddam Hussein. She was one of the people that said, you know, if we leave, who is left? You know, who's left to try and maintain some normality, some civility, and the straw for her, the last straw for her, was when her husband started pressuring her to wear the headscarf. And it wasn't that he believed she should wear the headscarf at all. It was because he was frightened if she left home without it, someone might attack her. And that was, you know, the last straw for them. And they actually became sought asylum and live in Canada now. And, you know, that was something that was really, you know, hard to see, was the rollback of women's rights in Iraq. And, you know, it's not just Iraq, it's many countries in conflict. Women are often, you know, their rights are one of the first victims one of the first things to suffer during conflict. And it's ironic that also women, can be the most effective peace builders as well. So, there's definitely a link between how societies respect women and the chances of those countries, having prosperity and having peace.
So it's just silly, really. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's about control, I guess. I don't know. It's just ridiculous.
Well, and I guess the part of it for me, what it brings up for me as well is how do we, which I guess is sort of like our coming back to then if we're looking at the big systems and we're saying, okay, women play are an integral part in making this happen. What can we do today in each of our lives, here, now, any of our listeners, to start making this change? What do you think? What's the answer?
Question.
All right. Well, this is such a big question. And it's, when I saw that was going to be one of the things we were discussing, I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to have to come up with some solutions for world peace. Yikes.
Cool.
It's a brainstorm.
Yeah. So I started doing some research as I do. And I came across an organization, an agreement. It's called the Women's Peace and Security and Humanitarian Aid Compact. It's supported by many countries around the world. And you can visit it at, let me read this, wpshacompact.org.
Okay, I'll put that up when we...
Yes, you can become a signatory to this pact. And now, anyone can participate. You can participate if you're in government. You can participate if you're in any sort of civil society organization or network, if you're in the education sector, if you're in the private sector, if you're in a youth organization, if you're in an international or regional organization. So that covers a huge amount of people. So the first step, you review the framework. It is available in many different languages. Then there's a list of actions that you can download, and you just select one or more actions from any of the, I guess, focus areas, and you identify possible partners that you can work with on these actions, and then you fill out a form indicating what actions you want to take and what investments you're going to make, whether that's time or money, to implement them. But, it sounds daunting, but it actually means, for example, if you're in the private sector, you might be an IT company or telecommunications. You can help women peace builders to access digital technologies. You can also commit to protecting the information of women, protecting the information and privacy of human rights defenders, peace builders, and other activists.
Wow.
So, that's an example of how the private sector could get involved. If you're in the education sector, in academia, you can fund, support, or undertake research into the root causes of conflict, into potential solutions, about how gender equality intersects with peace. If you're part of a community organisation, you can support women and girls to participate in all spheres of society, as police, as military, as judges, as corrections officers, in government. These are all key areas when we're talking about not just peace in wartime scenario, but also peace on the streets. Having more female police, more female judges, more female decision makers can definitely influence how society functions. So these are all, practical steps that we could take to achieve peace through gender equality. And another big one, of course, is engaging men and boys as allies and partners. So, I was actually really glad that you asked me that question, because I was a bit flummoxed at first. I was a bit daunted. I was thinking, gosh, what can I possibly have to say? And then I came across this organization, and I thought they've actually got some real practical steps that, private sector, academia, community organizations, these are all, and that was just some of the actions that you could take. They've got pages and pages, and you just look up, am I government, am I private sector, which area do I want to make an impact in? And they give you
there's all these organizations you haven't even heard of. But you know what I think, what I find interesting there, I can't remember if it was on TV or if I read something the other day, what it was, but I was watching something and it was showing how they had, it was like a kindy classroom, and they were getting them to draw pictures of different, they said, we're going to say something and draw a picture of the person. And so they were saying, draw a picture of a firefighter, draw a picture of a doctor. And they picked quite a few different professions. And I think out of the 25 kids, only 2 of them actually drew a female. They were all men that they drew. And then they said they actually brought in a doctor who was a woman to talk to them, and a firefighter who was a woman to talk to them. And they were, the kids were all, it's just this strange thing that I don't know how it gets inbuilt in our minds as kids.
Lots to work on. Like huge area.
So that sort of struck me. And I was thinking, so what do you think? What can you do today if you don't want to, what if you're a bit too, what if you're like, okay, but I don't know if I can join a big organization or but I actually love that. And I think everyone should be looking at that. I'm going to put that down. But do you think is it just about saying, oh, it's not a fireman, it could be a firewoman to our kids? Or
well, they're all such huge questions, aren't they? But I think Gina's just given such a brilliant practical thing. So even if 10 people who are listening to this podcast, when we hit 1 million followers and they watch Gina again and we get 500,000 people doing it,
how amazing will that be?
Well, that'll make a huge difference. I think that's, the easy thing is to say, well, let's have conversations about it. But I think action is really what needs to be done. And people getting involved and not being scared to do something. We all have these capabilities to change the world if we're determined to. And we actually do something about it. And I guess talking about it's a start. But doing something is very good.
And one of the things that it makes me think of as well is, even, for example, in my family, highlighting Jacinda Ardern, highlighting some of the female leaders and what they are doing for the world.
I think all the Baltic nations are all female leaders, and the Scandinavian countries are all led by females, and they're doing very well. Thank you very much.
Don't they often have the best education marks in that as well?
Yeah, the Finnish and the Estonians are brilliant educators.
More women.
And interestingly, Ukraine, which is suffering such terrible conflict at the moment, that also has an amazing, educational standards. People travel there from all over the world to study. They had very well-respected universities. There are many countries where education was valued, and in Iraq too. Before the Gulf War, Iraq was really respected. A lot of groundbreaking in terms of academia, a lot of groundbreaking doctors, engineers. There's a lot of educated people out there who want to make a difference. And I guess the Ukrainian conflict, I think people find it so shocking because it's in Europe. And we think we're, Australia's sort of history of European colonization. A lot of people identify with Europe, and seeing conflict unfold there, it's sort of like, oh, the unthinkable. But you know, there are countries all over the world where conflict is happening that I'm sure the people there also thought it was, you know, impossible to happen. But if you let your, you know, turn a blind eye to the rise of undemocratic elements, if you put profits, you know, one of the things I found when my friends talked about how Saddam Hussein came to power, a lot of it is to do with the economy. You know, he did great things for the economy until he started waging wars, and people were prepared to, you know, ignore what was happening in terms of human rights because of the economy, and that's certainly not something that is unique to Iraq. So, you know, I think that's, you know, when I look at what's happening in America, for example,
exactly.
you know, it shows you that democracy is quite much more fragile, I think, than we think, and that we do need to value it and support it, and try and support also the tradition of free speech, of respecting each other's opinions in a civil way. You know, that's, you know, on a smaller scale, I guess we're talking about big picture peace building, but, you know, at the political level also, that's something that we can do by being civil, you know, respecting democratic traditions, and taking part in democracy too. You know, I lived in America actually on 2 occasions. I spent a couple years in New York, and then later I spent 6 years in Washington, D.C. And, you know, a lot of Americans don't vote. They don't have compulsory voting there, and many, many people just simply do not vote. So, you know, the will of the people isn't necessarily represented by who is in power. And one thing I discovered when I came back to Australia was that the penalties for not voting are now very, very insignificant. And when I left Australia, it actually was pretty costly. If you didn't vote, you were tracked down and you got a large fine. And now, you know, it's a pretty
$55.
minor penalty.
No way,
and,
is it?
Yeah, 55.
I didn't realize. I thought it was a
it's-
big deal too.
yeah, the penalties have definitely decreased, and you know, I think it's good in Australia that we do have compulsory voting. Even places like Canada, it's not where, you know, I sort of think of Canada. My husband's from Canada. Australia has a lot of sort of shared traditions, large geography, multicultural population, history that we have in common, but people there don't have to vote. And we're sort of shocked by the idea, but I think it's great, because then we do have a say in, you know, who our government is representative of people's thing to, you know, some extent.
Definitely.
I think they think that they want the people who think about voting to vote, but I think it's important to encourage everyone to think about it and do it. So absolutely, agree with you. Yeah.
So cherishing, you know, the right to vote, and actively voting, not just going through the motions, I guess, and ticking a box is you know, a way that we can protect our own democracy.
Because I mean, imagine if it was taken away, the uproar that there would be if that right was taken away from us. It would be terrible. So, but I just feel like, perhaps we don't realize how lucky we are to have that. So all of our listeners out there need to be getting out there and voting, I guess as well, for me, I figure it's that thing of, don't complain about something unless you're actually willing to have partaken in it as well.
For sure.
Gina, how can our listeners find out more about you? How can they stay in touch?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a website. It's ginawilkinson.net. So you can always reach out to me through there. I'm also fairly active on Instagram. you can meet my hairless cat, Obi-Wan. And I also post bits and pieces on there. I guess they're probably the two easiest ways to reach me. Yeah, I'm actually relatively new to social media. Even though I was in the traditional media, I sort of avoided social media like the plague. And my publishers said, you must get on social media. And it was actually better than I thought it would be. I actually, I've reconnected with a lot of people around the world that I sort of lost contact with because nobody emails anymore. That's also, a forgotten technology. And I remember I also joined Facebook, and the first day I was on Facebook, I saw a post from one of my closest friends. She lives in New Zealand. And she was actually mentioning that her father had died. And I had met her father many times. And if I hadn't been on Facebook, I probably wouldn't have known about that. So I immediately, contacted her. And, I was just so grateful that she probably wouldn't have emailed me individually to tell me about that until much later down the track. So yeah, I'm actually
as long as
being
it doesn't...
a recent newcomer to social media. I guess I'm still in the honeymoon phase.
As long as you don't get too addicted that you're scrolling and not writing your second book, Gina.
I know, that's what I was wondering. Is there another one coming up?
Yeah, I hope so. I have some ideas, but I've got to admit, the whole lockdown thing was very difficult. I've got two boys, school-age boys that needed a lot of homeschooling. One of them has multiple learning disabilities. The other one's on the autism spectrum. So, dealing with people over the internet, actually not too bad for him. Possibly easier than in real life, but the organizational aspects of getting the work done, that was pretty much a full-time job. So I really had to put the creative side of my life on the back burner. But they have gone back to school now. And I miss them so no, so that has really changed my day, and so I have more time to start working on my next book.
Okay. Well, we'll have to. I'll keep looking at you on Instagram to find out what that might be about, or when that might be coming out.
Well, Gina, it's been a delight. Suzanne spoke very highly. I'm looking forward to reading your book, and it sounds like a really interesting perspective. And wow, what an experience! And to get it down in fiction is wonderful. So well done. And thanks so much for your insights and your practical suggestions. And it's been fantastic talking to you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Oh, lovely to meet you too.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Oh, and don't forget to...
Subscribe, comment, like, all of the above. Listen to you can listen to the sound podcast on... Yeah,
although if they've just watched us on YouTube, they may not want to then listen as well.
Oh, true, but they may want to listen again because it's so fascinating.
Okay, bye everyone.